Going live.
Thank you. Welcome back to Senate Education on Friday, February 18th. We're now being joined by Sarah Kenny, Morgan Crossman, and Caitlin Northey of Let's Grow Kids. This is regarding S283, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to education. Ms. Kenny contacted me yesterday or the day before with some questions, comments, and concerns about 283. This is the miscellaneous education bill. And I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Sarah, and let you outline the concerns. And I know that I'm kind of in the please bring solutions to the table, and I'm sure you have a solution to any concerns you're going to outline. So I really appreciate all three of you being here, and it's great to have you.
Indeed. Thank you, Senator Campion. Yes, so for the record, I'm Sarah Kenny, the Chief Policy Officer at Let's Grow Kids. And with me today are Dr. Morgan Crossman from Building Bright Futures and Dr. Caitlin Northey from the University of Vermont. And I will just give you sort of a big picture of why we reached out to Senator Campion and why we're here today. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Northey and then Dr. Crossman to give a little bit more of the context. And so we're talking specifically about Section 2 of the Miscellaneous Education Bill, which would expand the prohibition on suspension and expulsion to also apply to pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten programs. So those are the childcare programs that are partnering with the state to offer universal pre-kindergarten. And to be clear, we support not expelling and suspending kids from early childhood education programs. I think you'll get agreement from all of us that we do not want young children expelled or suspended from early childhood education programs. And as is often the case in legislative work, it's slightly more complicated than one would hope on the face of it. And this is an issue that Dr. Crossman and Building Bright Futures have been looking at for the past couple of years, really in partnership with state agency partners and lots of other stakeholders. And it's definitely been a thorny issue for many years. The complications of how we deliver special education services and how we provide supports for children who have specialized needs and specialized health needs in childcare programs, where, as I know you are all aware, we have a huge crisis in childcare in this state and a lack of availability, and especially in this moment, a very acute staffing shortage in these programs. And so what we often hear from families is that it wasn't anybody's fault necessarily that their child was not able to thrive in that program, but it was a resource issue, that the childcare program did not have the expertise or resources to be able to support their child to thrive in that environment. And it's a terrible situation that leaves families and children left out and potentially further traumatizing kids who are already struggling. So it's been a long-standing need in the state that we have not cracked this nut yet. And so what I'm proposing is to add in some study language into the bill in addition to the language that you have proposed to be in there. And so I want to start by turning it over to Dr. Northey, if that's okay, who just authored in the last 2 years a really helpful and illustrative report with some of her colleagues at UVM on this issue.
Thanks, Sarah. I am honored to be here on behalf of my research team, which also includes Drs. Lori Meyer and Valerie Wood, to discuss a report promoting inclusion and exploring supports for children with specialized needs in early childhood education settings. It recommended ways to prevent suspension and expulsion, and it was published last spring. So our quality improvement project was funded through Vermont's Preschool Development Birth Through 5 grant, and it reflects this growing recognition of the detrimental effects suspension and expulsion can have on young children and their families, but also this national commitment to prevent suspension and expulsion for very young children. And our project really aimed to better understand the supports and services that were available across agencies to young children with specialized needs and their families in the context of accessing early care and learning opportunities in Vermont. And our project focused on children with specialized needs because they are particularly vulnerable to suspension and expulsion and face challenges accessing safe and high quality childcare. So we were tasked by the state to really take a look at what's going on and to find out what recommendations we might have for improving it. As we all know, the first 5 years are incredibly important. I'm assuming you all know about the research on that and why this particular developmental window is such an important one to make sure that children have access to high quality learning and care opportunities, and that they have consistent access to those. So our project was informed by multiple stakeholders, and the final report, which I believe I sent to Daphne and you should have received, includes a literature review to demonstrate what is already known about risk and adaptive factors associated with suspension and expulsion of young children with specialized health needs. It includes an inventory of resources available in Vermont to support the early childhood system as it was described by Vermont state leaders. And it also includes descriptions of the strengths and limitations of the early child care system from the perspectives of families with children identified as having specialized needs and professionals engaged in the field of early childhood education. There's also a section on lessons learned from the leaders of 2 states that are recognized as innovators in this area. So those were Arkansas and Colorado, before concluding with recommendations. To give you an overview, I'm just going to go through the 8 recommendations that we ended our report with. And those really look at how to improve Vermont's early childhood systems to help prevent suspension and expulsion. So the first one is that Vermont should create a data system that can function across multiple state agencies and early childhood settings. Children with specialized health needs often received care across multiple early childhood settings and providers, which may be overseen by different agencies in Vermont. So a data system that can be integrated and accessed across agencies is important, and it would help us understand the magnitude of this issue in our state. The second recommendation is that we increase collaborations within and across state agencies to strengthen the EC system. When state leaders and personnel understand the different sectors of the system, they can work together to overcome challenges, they can pool money and resources, they can just function more effectively and efficiently. And they begin to value all perspectives, and they design policies that are more inclusive of those perspectives and programs, and then initiatives can be implemented across settings more successfully. Third, we said that Vermont really should evaluate the use of one-on-ones in early care and learning settings. We know that not every child with specialized needs will require a one-on-one adult support to be successful in their setting, but some do. And Vermont should explore cases in which one-on-one adult support is being utilized to better understand the key issues and needs underlying the use of one-on-ones. It's possible that the needs of some of these students could be met with less intensive supports. However, these less intensive supports are lacking in the current early childhood system, leaving one-on-ones as a catch-all resource to support children. Fourth, we suggest that Vermont create a process for what the research calls a warm handoff. If a child is going to be expelled from their setting, there should be a process where a provider is making the decision and can really work to put in place childcare resource experts and call on the expertise of those to really connect with the families and help guide them to an alternative childcare arrangement. And this prevents families from being left to find new care on their own. And it's a really complicated process, which has been further complicated by COVID and the lack of available spaces in our state. Before I present the last 4 recommendations, I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that adults suspend and expel children. It is adults that determine the disciplinary actions that affect children and their families. Therefore, preventative models that aim to minimize and prevent the suspension and expulsion of young children often focus on changing the behavior of adults rather than targeting the child demonstrating the challenging behaviors. So for our 5th recommendation, we suggest creating a single integrated professional development system that will allow teachers in all early childhood settings to access high quality trainings. One of the best approaches to limiting suspension and expulsion is to build the capacity of the early childhood workforce. Educators need professional development that's focused on children's social and emotional development. There's supports for implementing interventions with children with specialized needs and training on special education. Teachers should have access to a variety of learning opportunities to meet them where they are in their learning. For example, something for people beginning to build their knowledge base all the way through advanced so that they can grow their confidence and support all children. 6th, we suggest that Vermont should invest in a statewide effort to expand early MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support pyramid model and practices in early childhood settings for young children to help prevent suspension and expulsion of at-risk children, including those with specialized needs. The implementation of early MTSS is a best practice for supporting children with challenging behaviors. And currently, Vermont is supporting the implementation of PBIS in K through 12 schools. Seventh, we suggest that Vermont support the compensation and well-being of the early childhood workforce. Early childhood educators are notoriously undercompensated and may not have access to health benefits, which can affect their own mental, physical, and emotional health.
Good point.
As states position teachers to be the pivotal levers of change in shaping children's positive behaviors, we have to acknowledge the tensions that are present in this dynamic. And research has demonstrated that teachers' well-being related to job stress, depression, burnout is likely to play a significant role in their decision to suspend or expel a child. And so finally, we recommend the creation of inclusion-centered policies. So at the state level, policy should demonstrate a commitment to inclusion. Inclusion of children with specialized health needs to be the norm, not the exception. Suspension and expulsion of children, especially those with specialized needs, affects children's learning and development and produces hardships for families related to stress and possibly an inability for a parent to work in short and long-term ways as they struggle to find another childcare placement. We're having this conversation, as Sarah said, because we believe that young children should not be suspended or expelled, right? The research suggests that states should create policy that centers the inclusion of children with specialized needs and prohibits expulsion. Head Start has done this on a federal level. However, if you remember one thing from my spiel of this report, please let it be this. Removing suspension and expulsion as options requires resourcing the intersecting systems of care so they can collaborate with parents, utilize early childhood mental health consultation, and refer children for an evaluation to qualify for services under IDEA. Our project really demonstrated that Vermont could do more to prevent the suspension and expulsion of young children with specialized needs by improving our early childhood systems and how they interact with each other to better support children, their families, and the early childhood workforce. So I'm very pleased to be here today for this discussion and hoping to help us move things forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Northey. Ms. Kenny, I'm looking at the amendment. More than just add a comma here and a colon here. Yeah. It's doozy, and I think we'll be looking for our friends in health and welfare, where you spend a lot of time also helping us with this. Mm-hmm. I think a couple of things. First of all, Dr. Northey, I think one of the things that you said that really, everything you said was really resonates with me, but in particular, of course, when you're in a job where you are not getting paid enough, where you don't have access to good healthcare, et cetera, just the overall stress of one's economic life, it's sadly logical where, you're not going to be at your best. I mean, that's true for anyone. And so I really appreciate you raising that. And I think everyone here agrees, the great people that do this work are certainly not compensated where they should be. So Sarah, how do you want to do this? Do you want to take us through the amendment, or what?
I was thinking that it might make sense to hear from Dr. Crossman first. So just to give you a little bit of context, we affectionately call it the PIES report that Dr. Northey worked on, came out, and a lot of us have been, sitting with it over the past several months and having conversations about it in various places. And one of those places is at the Building Bright Futures tables. Mm-hmm. And then, just so you all know, we at Let's Grow Kids came together with our partners at the Vermont Family Network, and who work specifically with families with children who have specialized needs and specialized health needs. And we met with Dr. Northey and her colleagues at UVM to think about what some possible next steps might be for moving that work forward and figuring out what the resources are that are needed. And we had landed on the idea of a task force that would be essentially building on the Act 35 task force that you all created last year around inclusive inclusive policies in schools for K through 12. And it's almost like a 2.0 version of that, that's looking specifically at early childhood education environments, but importing some of the recommendations and the work of Dr. Northey and her colleagues. But I was hoping that you all could hear from Dr. Crossman first about how those, the conversations that have been happening at BVF, and specifically about the data needs, which are any.
Thank you, Dr. Crossman.
For the record, Dr. Morgan Crossman, I'm the Executive Director at Building Bright Futures, and thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. And Sarah, thank you for clarifying the process by which those amendments were developed. Building Bright Futures serves as Vermont's early childhood public-private partnership. We are charged by Title 33, Chapter 46 as Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And in that role, we are charged with maintaining and monitoring the vision and strategic plan for Vermont's early childhood system. And we do that through a network of over 450 partners that are coming together monthly through 12 regional councils, 7 strategic plan committees, and the State Advisory Council. And it's really important in the context of today's discussion to articulate that the State Advisory Council does not directly support or oppose any specific proposal, bill, piece of legislation. Our role is to convene partners, elevate the voices of families and early childhood stakeholders, to monitor that system and identify and provide you with the most up-to-date, high-quality data and information to inform your decision-making, and to serve as that primary advisor to the governor and the legislature. So my testimony today will outline the importance of focusing on equity in suspension and expulsion, elevating some of the urgent concerns that we are hearing from stakeholders, outlining our current work in this domain, and importantly, identifying the existing recommendations that have already been put forward on the best practices for prevention and supporting the needs of kids and our early childhood educators. And Dr. Northey already outlined several of those that the State Advisory Council has already put forward as well. So the first piece is really that suspension and expulsion is such a critical issue and is coming back as an urgent priority for children under the age of 5, more broadly under the age of 8, and for our early childhood educators. And we agree that equity within Act 35 and S283 across both public and private programs is important, but not to forget that there's a really important need to invest in the strategies and how we are preventing suspension and expulsions. There's also an urgent need on behalf of our early childhood stakeholders for clear guidance and definitions. And those are required in order for the field to be able to actually make progress and follow the rules and guidance that are coming out. So in terms of concerns that we're hearing elevated from stakeholders, the first is that kids, families, and early childhood educators are really struggling. We're in a mental health crisis alongside a workforce crisis, right? We're not operating in a traditional sense right now. So we're seeing increased behavioral challenges. We're seeing burnout through the pandemic, and it's exacerbating the need for urgent and timely preventative support. And so I think these things have been discussed for many years, and the strategies and investments are now, again, seen as urgent to both support and retain early childhood educators, and really be thinking about how we are focused on the mental health of children, families, and the folks that are serving them. The other major concern that we're hearing from stakeholders is a lack of clear communication, definitions, and guidance. So again, they've stated there's an immediate need for clear definitions of what constitutes a suspension and expulsion, consistent guidance, and then clarity from the Agency of Education on what this means, how they are being supported in this domain. But the
Dr.
lack
Crossman,
of clarity, yeah, please.
I just want to interrupt because this is a great spot where Ms. Kenny, would you share the example that you shared with me by phone a couple of nights ago around the suspension expulsion? Some of the vagueness of that. Do you remember that example?
I don't know, Morgan, if you were going to get to that.
We're going to get there. Okay.
You had examples of some of what you're hearing from the field.
Sure, I'm happy to give you a couple of examples. And this is also in written testimony, Senator Campion. I believe it went out, but I apologize because it came out probably within the last hour. So, what we've heard around, for example, soft suspensions is a challenge regarding that definition. Stakeholders in the field are concerned about the consistency in those definitions. So with a definition of 2 or more hours being outside of the classroom being considered a soft suspension. And so the concern that is elevated is that while private pre-K partners are compensated for 10 hours a week, the 2 hours could be across all of the hours that a child operates within that program. So there's a discrepancy leading to concerns around folks' ability to uphold best practices here. And the quote that I have from the field that describes some of the concern around this is as follows, and this is from an early education coordinator. Helping a child reset by teaching them coping skills in a quiet space while protecting the other children in the classroom is very developmentally appropriate and actually considered to be differentiating instruction, such as high quality programs are expected to do. It does happen all the time. And to ask a program to categorize this as a suspension and fill out a report each time this teaching technique is utilized is not practical and is removed from daily operations of preschool programming. In grades K through 8, a child accessing a resource room is not considered a suspension. So why is there a double standard for early childhood education? And so this is just one example of the concerns that we're hearing from the field. And I think that I also want to be clear that I think the Agency of Education is working really hard to be more clear in their guidance around some of these things, but there are still some challenges around the consistency of the information that's coming through verbal presentations versus some other written memos and just some challenges around the clarity of that guidance. So I think that the field is really saying, we need very clear, concise understanding across every definition of suspension and expulsion. And what does that mean for our programs, and how should we be thinking about it? And how do we make sure that we're using national best practice to support a child's development and learning?
And so what you see in the draft draft language that I submitted for the committee's consideration is language that, and it almost certainly needs further work because we literally threw it together in like 24 hours, but is looking at creating a task force, building on the work that Building Bright Futures is already doing. Sorry.
I apologize. Are you going to run through the entire thing now? Because there are a series of other recommendations that I wanted to outline.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to the immediate question. And Senator Lyons, did you have a follow-up?
And Dr. Crossman, if I just want to make sure we have until 3:30, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time to go through the amendment.
Perfect.
Okay.
I will be brief. So
in the meantime, Senator Lyons, was this a time where you wanted to ask a question?
I don't know if you've gotten to it yet, but I am particularly interested in the mental health section because it actually includes some recommendations that we have put into S197. So I'm just going to suggest that you look at S197, and I'm encouraging my committee members to do likewise. So, because we're going to look at that bill together with education, so it'll be a stronger bill with the recommendation that you have from the State Advisory Committee.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
So I just want to call the committee's attention to a range of existing recommendations that are out there on things we can be doing now to support some of this work. So as a state, Vermont has been following research and national best practice in this space, and the Agency of Education has been spearheading a lot of work around early multi-tiered system of supports. But there have been repeated recommendations from Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council and the Early Childhood Mental Health Task Force calling for significant investment in prevention and supportive approaches that include early MTSS and scaling it statewide, thinking about special accommodations grants and early childhood and family mental health consultation alongside embedding the Strengthening Families Protective Factors framework, and thinking about how to really think through integration and operate under universal developmental screening across both early care and education settings. And as Dr. Northey referenced, the need for an integrated early childhood data system so that we are actively monitoring all of this work. So finally, I'll end with the work that BBF is doing in this space. We are currently supporting the Agency of Education on a data brief, specifically tackling suspension and expulsion for children under the age of 8, and are partnering with them on accessing both the quantitative and qualitative data that's there and documenting all of those limitations. And then we are consistently convening public and private partners through the Early Learning and Development Committee, which is the strategic plan committee at BBF. Both Dr. Northey and partners at Let's Grow Kids serve on that committee as well. So we are really well positioned to continue that convening to discuss those critical challenges, to be developing concrete recommendations and figuring out how to move forward in this domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crossman. This is all incredibly helpful, and I really want to, there does seem to me, and I'm looking to Senator Lyons if she agrees, a lot of this would overlap with a morning committee, and we're thrilled you're here. And I think this, if Senator Lyons is okay with it, I think we should certainly consider putting this amendment in after we, from what I've read. But I just want to make sure Senator Lyons is comfortable with this bit of overlap work. I
think it's great.
Okay.
I do have
Please.
a question though about the constituents, the folks in the workforce, and I know that Building Bright Futures is exceptionally capable. So I'm wondering if this is quite a heavy list right here. Does it? And I'm sure you've talked it through. But is there a way to have Building Bright Futures take the lead and then have subgroups working for and with you to make recommendations back? I mean, so there are different levels here. You're talking about multi-tiered support systems. You're talking about special needs. So there are some slight differences within the group. And rather than have the entire group do all of the work, put you in charge of that, and then have you structure with folks some subgroups. I'm thinking about this. It goes to S, A to S. That's a huge group.
Huge.
And it's going to be, it'll take about 4 meetings just to get coordinated, and hopefully people will show up. So I don't know what conversations you had about who's there.
That's a
Sarah,
good
do you want to
question.
take it over?
Oh, yeah, I'll just say something and then I'll turn it back over to Dr. Crossman too. Senator Lyons, it's a very prescient question, and it's exactly the thinking that you're going down the same track that we were. And the way that we tried to structure this task force here is that it builds on the Early Learning and Development Committee at BBF, which already exists and has already been doing some of this work. And then I think essentially what we're doing here is asking you all in legislation to authorize that group to carry on that work, and also designating people who should definitely be part of it, many of whom are already at the table, but not all of them. And sort of, giving the stamp of approval that this work is critically necessary, that these voices need to be part of it. I think your thinking is right on, that it's very likely that once this group were, together, that they would chunk out the work and, sort of divvy it up and maybe have subcommittees operating. But the idea was to embed this within the work of Building Bright Futures through the Early Childhood Action Plan, through the Early Learning and Development Committee, and just make sure that folks who need to be at the table are. And I think Building Bright Futures is really excellent at thinking through all the voices who need to be there. And this would just be sort of bolstering that work for them, and then giving them sort of, some formal duties.
Well, so, I mean, given that folks are already around the table and Bright Futures is already leading the enterprise, then we could make a few changes here and there. But the question I have is about ensuring that there are some specific areas of investigation, because you've listed now those 6 or 7 recommendations. And are you thinking that everyone around the table will be involved with all of those all the time, or is there some preliminary work that goes on and then bring back recommendations? I don't know how you structure
Yeah, and I'm thinking what we should probably do is just walk through the amendment right now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who best to do that, but Ms. Kenny,
So Sarah, before we do that, I just want to make sure we're clear with the committee that this proposal on the amendment is coming from Let's Grow Kids and the Vermont Family Network. Sarah, am I correct? So
Yep.
this is not developed by Building Bright Futures. We are here to respond to this just as you are responding to this amendment. So just wanting to be clear about what's in front of you and where it was developed, and that, I agree a task force is helpful in a range of different ways, but I can't speak to the different sections and components for what is currently in there and how it would function today, but we'll be happy to respond to that in future testimony.
So shall we
Okay.
walk through what we envisioned here,
Please.
which is a building on the Building Bright Futures current structure through the Early Learning and Development Committee, and then listing the folks who the partners that we've been talking to felt like probably should be at the table. And as I said, a number of these folks already are at the Early Learning and Development Committee, but not all of them, I think. And Dr. Crossman could tell you all more about who's currently at that table and who's not. But this would be giving the sort of legislative imprimatur to pull all these folks together at this task force table. And then the powers and duties that we have contemplated here are building off of the recommendations that you heard from Dr. Northey and some of the recommendations that have come from the State Advisory Council as well. So reviewing the current supports and services that are currently available. And again, some of this information already exists. And so, wouldn't be that heavy a lift for a task force. Looking at those across the various early childhood education settings and the regions of the state, because we know it's inconsistent around the state what services are available to young children. Defining, as you heard from Dr. Northey, and from Dr. Crossman, the definition of what exclusionary practices are is so critically important. And so this group would be tasked with bringing these folks together to define exclusionary practices in early childhood settings and identifying best practice procedures. And you've heard some of those already today. So it would be pulling those together in one place and making sure that those are trauma responsive and supporting the social, emotional, and mental health needs of students. Also looking at professional development programs, as you heard from Dr. Northey, the adults in the program are the ones who really make the difference for kids, and ensuring that those folks have the training and skills that they need to be able to support children to thrive in classrooms. So reviewing what's currently available for professional development programs. And then also recommending additional or more uniform services that need to be available to the kids in these classrooms. I think it's really important to remember that for K through 12, when we think about suspension or expulsion and sort of the special education services that are available for kids K through 12, there's a whole infrastructure set up through the schools, right? But when young children are in childcare and early learning programs, there is a whole range of different kinds of programs that they're in, and those are very often independent nonprofit or businesses that don't have access to that full range of supports that a public school would. And those kids may or may not have access to special education. If they're in universal pre-K, they have access to special education services through the school, but these may not be available in their childcare program. So there's a lot of inconsistency around the state. So this would be recommending additional or uniform services. And then also looking at the data that's readily available and identifying the data that is not. And as you heard from Dr. Crossman, that's already work that they're undertaking with AOE and the Child Development Division. So this would be, building upon that work and making sure that that data, where possible, is disaggregated so that we know exactly who we're talking about in terms of these students. And then the way that we drafted this amendment is that the report would be due back later this year. There are components of this, including the definition of exclusionary practice, that really need to happen sooner than that. But I think that this would just say by then, there would need to be a report back to the legislature about all of these.
So, yeah, thank you. Let me make sure I've got. So I'm just going to be honest. Our agenda is set for next week. To have these people in, it would, to have everybody in to talk about this, there's just no path forward, to be perfectly honest, before crossover. Why would we not, even though I completely support and endorse the questions, why would we not give this to the task force that has already been formed to come back to us? I
think that's a fine approach. I think as long as there is legislative language saying that this is that Building Bright Futures and their committee is tasked with this. And I think
Do
something
you
to
understand what I'm saying?
ensure.
I'm just trying to think of
I
how
do.
do we
do
get
understand what
this
you're saying. Yeah.
done? We'd have to have all these people in to say, are you okay with it?
Mhm.
And and we already have that task, the school discipline task force out there. Seems like if we were to give them the questions with, I don't know, with some additional direction might be the best way to go to actually get it done. Now you could go to the House afterward and, and add it there. I just want to work in reality here. That's all in terms of our time. So go ahead.
Fully appreciate that. Yeah. And I realize we're coming in last minute, and I apologize. As I said to Senator Camp the other day, I was not paying close enough attention to the miscellaneous education bill this year.
Apologize. Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, and this is not coming from Building Bright Futures, but I will say that sometimes it helps to have the legislature say all these people need to come to the table. Because I think, Building Bright Futures is a place where everybody does come for the most part, but I think it can be really helpful to have the legislature weighing in on who needs to be part of the conversation.
Senator Campion, I wonder if I can reframe your question. I think you were asking whether you could give what's here to the existing task force, not what we're talking about here that is outlined, but the existing task force as a school board. Is that what you were asking?
Exactly.
Thank you for that clarification. I actually don't know that that's the best route, because we need folks who are specialists in early childhood education to be part of this conversation. And that's not how the K through 12 task force was envisioned.
Can we expand the task force a little bit to make sure those voices are heard and consulted with, something like that?
You're referring to the Act 35 task force?
Yeah. It's already something that's there. And again, this task force, we can't get this task force through. I could be completely wrong. We may wrap everything up quickly and have a lot of extra time, but I don't see that happening. Mm-hmm. So that's why we already have a structure out there. Where I'm sitting, it just seems to make sense to say, okay, here are the questions. We're going to expand that task force's membership or require that they consult with certain people. That sort of seems to make the most pass kind of the straight face test in terms of timing.
My only question about that is I'm not sure if the Act 35 task force is still in existence. So I would need more information about that.
I thought it was ongoing.
I think it's ongoing.
Yeah, it's
I also believe that it is pre-K through 12.
Yep.
But the stakeholders that I'm seeing listed in what Sarah presented are not the same stakeholders that are currently on the task force.
Right. Yeah, we did build this based off of the stakeholders on the Act 35 task force, and then added in the folks who would be specialists in early childhood education, which feels really important because it is different, right? This issue just looks different. And
it does. And I think one of the things is, given the complexity of early childhood settings, right? You could have one setting that receives vouchers and state public money and is a private childcare. And goodness gracious, if they also have a Head Start classroom. Then you're looking at 4 different sets of regulations, 4 different sets of funding. Like there's not only a need for definitions, there's also a need for kind of unifying policy that can work in these settings. And that really needs to be designed by people that understand what those settings are going through.
Senator Lyons.
So initially, we were talking about the issue of expulsion for these kids, but it sounds like this is going way beyond that and looking at all of the licensing and regulatory policies that are in place to make those more uniform. And then the data piece, and I do have a question about the data piece and whether the current work that's going on with childcare centers will overlap to allow for data collection and analysis. And I don't know the answer to that. So there were a bunch of questions in there. I think Dr. Northey, you're smiling, but
I would just say that I apologize that I brought multiple sets of regulations to the table. I just meant that when we're defining suspension and expulsion, we have to acknowledge that there are already some regulations that do define it. And so a task force really needs to think about the best way to approach language in that instance so that there aren't competing policies in one setting.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you all. A really important topic, we know. But in the beginning of the testimony, you said that the task force included people who were already at the table. So can you, and now I'm hearing you say that these people are not at the table. So is there a, can you justify that for me? And I mean, are these all new people that would be included if we went with Senator Campion's recommendation that we turn this over to the existing task force?
I would have to cross-check the list of Act 35 task force folks, but there are a number of people on this list who are not there. When I was saying that they were already at the table, I meant at the Building Bright Futures Early Learning and Development Committee. A number of these folks are already on that committee, but not everybody on the list in the amendment that we're proposing here.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, sorry if I was confusing.
Ms. Kenny, do you want to take another stab at this? And by that, I mean, help us to get something to the House, where on the House side, you can work to expand it, build it. I mean, we would have to hear from all these, unless, all these folks, and we can't. So it's just not possible given our schedule. So what I would entertain though, and I don't want to speak entirely for the committee, is a shortened version, one way, something that either, we use the current, what I'm thinking is we use the current task force, add some questions, expand it, we get it through the Senate and the House, and then start to have those conversations with them now, so that when it gets there, again, I don't think I'm not seeing anybody really objecting to it, but we counted last night, I think we have 17 more hours before crossover. So it's 2 weeks, 8 days, not a lot of time.
Yeah. Yes, I'm happy to take another crack
Okay.
at this. I think my first instinct would be, as opposed to building on the current Act 35 task force, to remove the list of designated members here and just refer to the Early Learning and Development Committee and whoever else needs to be added at that table, and leave it, sort of vague for now, and have time between now and when the bill gets to the House to talk to other stakeholders who may or may not want to be enumerated there. I don't know if that would be palatable to the committee, but that's the first place I would go, just because the ELD committee is already having conversations about some of this.
Senator Lyons?
Just going back to my a question I asked a while ago about Bright Futures convening this and directing traffic with it. Is that something that would be amenable to Dr. Crossman? Or have you thought about that?
We have, and I do think that, a task force is helpful in supporting state discussions about existing data, the limitations to that data, determining how to scale and implement some of these strategies that we know to be true. I think that BBF, without going through every component in there, is the right entity to convene a task force through through the Early Learning and Development Committee. Some of the things that I'm thinking about within that, though, is that there is much more urgent guidance needed and clarity around existing definitions. The Agency of Education does know that and are working towards those things. And we are doing a lot of this work already. So it's not as if some of these discussions aren't happening, but there is some additional time needed to work this through. So I would say, I'm open to it in the general sense, but I definitely need to more thoughtfully review the proposal, understand what capacity is needed to move that forward, reviewing the actual report deadlines and any funding that might be needed to support the effort.
Thank you.
Senator Perchlik, what do you think?
I just wondered, as far as the crossover issue, if there's something we could just do with the language that we have in the miscellaneous bill. We don't have much language in there. We have that one little line, but is there something we could do there that either sets it up for the House or allows us just to move this bill with the for the other reasons that we want to do it, but still help, the bigger discussion that obviously needs to happen. I'm just thinking out loud. I wasn't really thinking about this issue today.
No, I appreciate that. I think we all are. And that's really, I think, Ms. Kenny, as easy as we can get this, since we probably could give it 30 minutes at some point. I would say Senator Perchlik's piece is ideal. Whatever we can do to tweak the language we already have in the miscellaneous ed bill to set us up for and to get the House ready. And then the other piece of that is we can start to work on it after crossover. I mean, as soon as crossover finishes, we can certainly start to dig into some of this. Would you be willing, Ms. Kenny, to try to go back to miscellaneous ed, take a look, see what we might add here and there to just get it to the point where the House will see it and it'll be germane and you can work with them. And also I would recommend just contacting Representative Webb this weekend. I'm happy to talk to her
yesterday, as a matter of fact. So,
and
yeah.
she's all full steam ahead.
Yeah, so she can't wait to see what you all do, I think.
Okay.
On many levels. But yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if you and I can find some time on Monday, that would be great. And then Daphne will schedule you back in here on Tuesday. So you and I can touch base on Monday a little bit to see where things are at. And then we'll have three of you back in on Tuesday and just again, try to move something. And I'll also reach out to Representative Webb and again, after crossover. Senator Lyons, are you okay with that as the chair of? Okay.
No, of course.
All
This
right.
is terrific. For me, it's so critically important that the Agency of Education become engaged in the discussion about pre-K. So I think it's terrific.
Okay.
I'm talking universal pre-K and what we need to do across the board with all the different sort of delivery places.
Okay. So our hearts are with you. It's timing and we just want to get and be as helpful as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for the time. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. And I'll look forward to hearing from you and we can set up a time for Monday and Daphne will be in contact about Tuesday.
Sounds great. Thank
Thanks
you all.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Demaray, I think how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Let's see. I see that Daphne has sent us a new memo. Okay. Great. If everyone has an opportunity to just pull that up in their emails. We'll just take a minute to look at it. So, Mr. Demaray, when you wrote that last sentence or you kept it in, provide you with related policy language if requested, what kind of request were you anticipating?
Just a request for statutory language.
I wonder if that makes sense to say that. Committee impressions on where this is at this point.
I stopped at mini grants. I had a question earlier and I forgot to ask it about whether we just call it grants or mini grants. Mini sounds tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a word actually, but I looked at Senator Perchlik and Senator Hooker. Maybe we just change it to grants
or block grants. I think one of the goals was to say that it's just a set amount that's kind of formulaic and not. I'd probably use like categorical aid instead of mini grants, but it's semantics. I don't know how much it matters for a letter.
Oh, right.
But it could just grants is fine. Grants works.
I think grants is better than mini grants.
Okay, grant it is.
And I did have a conversation on the break, if you don't mind,
Thank you. Please.
that like as Kinney just said, it's more complicated when you look into it. Because like the different levels of EL instruction really depends on the needs of the child, which obviously makes sense. That if you have never spoken English before, you need a lot more attention than if you just like you speak English but your family doesn't. So things like that. So whether it's a part-time aide or a full-time teacher and cultural liaisons and counselors is really changed. So it's not like an automatic number. Like if you have a few students, this is what you need. If you have more students, since the disparity of need is so great. But that said, just given the need to pick a number, it seemed like under 5 was a number that seemed like with 5 students that don't have too great a need, that maybe in these rural areas you would come across that the $25,000 makes sense for that range, and then after 5 you would jump up to the 50,000. But it's an imperfect. Anywhere you draw the line, it's going to change. But so I guess that's kind of my suggestion, to say 1 to 5 ELL students be $25,000. But if you have 5 to 25, then you have $50,000.
Senator Chittenden.
I thought I recall you would know this better, Senator Perchlik or Senator Hooker, but there was some distinction not on number of ELLs per school district, but in per school. So if a school district has multiple schools and there's ELL students there and there, then that might be the factor to raise it to 50,000. Is that ringing any bells?
Yeah, and I think of it that because it's the school district that hires the staff. So, and this says school districts, even though if I've been saying schools, I often get the two confused. But yeah. Assuming they're close by, although some school districts have some schools quite far away, but I think it might be hard for some of the rural schools that have 5 ELL students to find an ELL instructor in their area. So they might have to travel and share with other schools and other districts.
I think I think so. This is what I'm thinking, the path forward. We would put it on the calendar just so everyone knows that we would vote on it on Tuesday, just to announce, to those watching. I'll call Senator Cummings. I think we're still more than fine with timing, actually, but and that also gives us a little more time to think about this. Senator Lyons.
I'm just going back to the last sentence again.
Yeah. No, it's.
So I like ending the sentence at discuss it with you. And then I'm trying to figure out what policy language we're going to give to finance, because we really need to take some time to sort through that. And as you said earlier, it might go in the budget.
Yeah,
so
I agree with you, Senator Lyons. I'd put a period after you and then be done with it. And then we work with the probes on the language or something like, I'm looking to Senators Hooker and Perchlik, who were on the committee. Does that make sense to the two of you? The very last sentence.
I think that leaves it open so that we can do further discussion with the probes. And so
I mean, it's not as though Senator Cummings and that team down there, I mean, we've been in contact. It's not as though they're going to say, wait, where's that sentence? They're not going to say we better not ask them. I think this has been a fluid conversation. Want to get them something. Okay, Jim, that makes sense?
It does. I have a question going back to Senator Perchlik's proposal. I get the 1 to 5, 25,000, 6 to 25, 50,000. But is it per school or is it per school district?
I thought about, but I think school district, because that's where who's getting the money. So I
Right.
would do school district.
You could do it either way. I mean, you could. It's always going to go to school district, but you can make the payment based upon number of EOL at each school within the school district if you want. So you can still pay the school district either way.
Yeah, I guess I haven't thought about it enough. And I guess if we say we're going to vote it on Tuesday, maybe people will.
Yeah.
It'll focus people's
We're
attention.
watching
on
us. Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah.
For the next draft, would you prefer keeping school districts or school?
Yeah.
I personally, yes, but I'm looking to others. Yeah, personally, I like that. And that'll give everyone an opportunity to weigh in before Tuesday, before we vote.
Okay.
And Daphne, if you would put on the calendar for Tuesday, committee vote on memo to Senate Finance.
Got that. Will do.
Thank you. And yeah, Senator Pritchard.
And will Jim or Daphne email the slightly altered one this afternoon, just so we could
Yep.
maybe send it to some folks the weekend before Tuesday?
Yep, I'll do it right when we're done. Yep.
And Daphne, if you would also, post it. And email it to all of us so that we can just forward it around to folks after Jim makes those additional changes. Jim, could you also just put a little space at the top, between recommendation and our committee?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And maybe move over, okay, great. Anything else on this before we shift to Brad James? Okay, and Jim, we're going to see you in just a little bit on 219.
Okay.
Okay, great. Mr. James.
We're back.
Yeah.
Again, Brad James, Agency of Education. So I updated it with how we discussed it. I actually had put numbers on the very top and did not extend that one. So I can't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anyway. Column 1 is still the FY20 ELL count, so that's no change. Column 2 now is the FY20 tax rate, which is what was being asked for. So that's where basically people were in FY20. And then I lost the R and estimated rate in column 3. There's an R, supposed to be an R there. I'm sure it's in white font, so you can't read it. But column 3 is the tax rates that come from using all the weights plus the ELL weight of 2.49. And those are subtracted from the FY20 rate. So if we're using Addison Central as the first example, because it's on the first line, their FY20 rate was 1.618, and using their rate under using all weights goes up just over 6 cents. All right, so that's how we're reading this. Column 1, 2, 3, 4 now is the ELL grant, or partner. I'm sorry, I apologize. The ELL weight, but with a grant of $25,000 for those districts that have less than 25 or fewer. And then column 5, the last column, is the same thing, the change in tax rates if they had 25 or fewer, but at a $50,000 grant. So I also highlighted the negatives in yellow just because I figured it was going to be easier to see, to differentiate, because it gets confusing to me as you look down through these at times.
So I'm just going through these. Let's take a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Southwest Supervisory Union?
Southwest Supervisory Union would be Bennington's. They'd be right up at the top.
Yeah.
These are sorted by county, and then alphabetically by district.
I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, so I mean, you're seeing Southwest Vermont Unified or Union Elementary School District is a few down, like maybe 10 down. I should have put numbers.
No, these aren't by county, are they?
Yes, they are.
So I'm sorry. I'm looking at then the document I'm looking at says Addison Central.
Yep.
Okay,
Addison Northwest.
got it. Now I see it. Thank you. Got it.
It probably helps to put darker lines between the counties. That
No,
might
no,
help.
no, no. This is,
No,
this is-
I always think about these things after the fact. So
it's really interesting. Committee questions? This is a little bit more, in talking with Senator Hardy, what I kind of expected to see.
I think so.
Yeah,
Um,
this is really helpful. I'm glad Senator
Yeah.
Perch, yeah, this is, yeah,
And
yeah,
Senator Terrence Zini's not with us, but I think this is what he was looking for too the other day when he was.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, this will be sorted out in finance, but yeah, Senator or Mr. James, anything else?
I did do something at Senator Hooker's request, just a quick
Please.
second thing on what the tax rate impact would be. It's a very simple chart. It's the second one. I don't have my file up to see what it's called on your website, but it says probably says something to the effect of tax rate or tax rate impact or something like that. It's just a simple chart.
Tell me what is happening in Rutland Town, since I'm going to be asked.
Down. Let me jump
Yeah.
down. there.
Friend of mine lives there, and I think he may have a question or two.
They go up. I just checked them.
Yep, they go up
Yeah.
20 cents, and they
Yeah.
they have no ELL kids, so they're 20 cents across the board there.
There's kind of a neat incentive here to have a multicultural environment.
True.
So another friend of mine lives in North Bennington. Let's go to North Bennington for a
That's
second.
first page, about 7 or 8 down.
Yep, yep.
And again,
So
they have one ELL child, so they go up 9.5 cents almost and then they start dropping, and again they drop to 7.8 cents at 25,000 and 6.1 cent increase at 50,000.
Okay.
And again, there are lots of other factors in the background besides ELL that are making these tax
Oh,
rates.
absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
You have any friends that live in Norwich, Senator Campbell?
I do. I'm in Rutland. I'm all over the place.
Now that's really the limit of my friends.
Two.
Rutland Town and North Bennington. No offense to anybody here, but yeah. Okay, this is very helpful.
Okay, and
It kind of gives me a look into what April is going to be on the Senate floor as well. It's, there's a ways to go on this, and it's not going to be without its challenges. And it's yeah, Senator Perchlik.
Well, Mr. James was going over the second attachment to his email. We don't have it on
Yes.
our website yet, but that email.
Well, we do.
Those are-
I believe.
it is there. I just looked. It's called rate change impacts on
Oh,
home
okay.
It's there.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Okay.
So those are just, I guess it says that. Those are dollars.
Those, yeah, I don't like dollar signs.
Yeah, no, I'm just making
They
sure.
block it
Yeah.
all up. So yes, these are all dollars. And basically what I did is I just listed homestead values starting at $200,000 and increased by $50,000. It's down to $850,000. Figure, how far do you want to go? And then I looked at the first 4 columns are rate increases, the second 4 columns are rate decreases, and I went by a penny, by 5 cents, by 10 cents, and by 20 cents. Just picking numbers people can kind of extrapolate. But again, as I said, 1 penny raise is $10 per $100,000 home value. Because we tax on per 100. So that's just basically what you're seeing. And you're seeing that, it's, I don't know what else to say about it. It seems pretty explanatory to me. So, but Senator Hooker, is this what you were thinking of, something like this? So, I mean, again, when you compare that to this one, you can get a rough idea of what's going to happen with individual taxpayers,
Yeah. Oh, when you compare it to the second
To the-
sheet?
Yeah, the change in tax rates here proposed, obviously these are estimates, these are FY20 numbers.
Right.
And then looking at this, just seeing what's happening, it kind of gives you a rough idea of how it actually impacts the taxpayer, which I believe what Senator Hooker's real question was.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that, Brad.
No problem.
Okay. Okay. Anything else at this point? Mr. James, thanks so much for all of your work on this summer, as well as sticking with us through this point. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I actually like doing this. I wish I had more time to pay attention to it. Yeah, because I actually enjoy this part.
Well, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I think you're alone in that. But maybe,
I know that. I'm a little out there. I get
no,
that.
that's good. I think listen,
Somebody has to be.
it is an extremely important contribution to our state. So I hope you realize that. Senator Hooker.
Just a clarification before you go, Brad, that all of these numbers are inclusive of all of the weights.
That is
We're
correct.
not just talking about English language learners here. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about density. We're talking about sparsity. We're talking about all of those things.
Yes, we're checking out all the weights the task force recommended, which came from Professor Colby's October 28th memo.
Mhm.
That's what we're looking at right here. So it's all the weights that were recommended.
Great. Thank you.
Senator Campion.
Yeah, please.
And I know when you testified at the task force, you often gave all the caveats of, obviously these numbers are going to change because the pupils will change and what the budgets the school pass will change. So this is just to give us an idea what actually will happen, whatever, in 2 years when this would go into effect could be very different.
It could be, and it will be very different, because by then these numbers will be 4 years old. So nobody should think that this is what's going to happen. But what this is doing is hopefully giving us some idea of what could happen based on what we know from, at this point, 2 years ago. And this is not what is going to happen in FY20. It's all, or 24, I guess. It's all going to change. This might show general trends, but we're projected 2 years out. Who knows?
Okay. Committee, anything else at this point? Great. We'll put this up for a vote on Tuesday. Thanks, Brad.
You're very welcome.
Really great to see you.
Good to see you all too, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too. Okay, I think our final piece of work for today is to have Mr. Demarais back. If colleagues want to pull out their copy of 219. And I believe, I don't know if I marked mine, Jim, but I thought we were moving into the standard contract or close to it.
Yep. So we were on page 18.
Thank you.
And that's where your debate was around
Right.
having some exclusions for people on IEPs, for 504 plans, disabilities. So I'll draft it up for the next
Thank you.
version.
Yep.
And then, I think we got through that section, I believe. And we were going to move on to, as you say, the contracts, which is on page 21.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, we have a new section 15 here. It's a conforming change. So what we've done here on those three conditions we've been talking about, no discrimination, no use for religious worship, and taking an IEP student. The third one's already in law. But the way it's drafted in law today is that if it's a school, if a school accepts public tuition, they would have to comply with the IEP requirement. I've moved it to be eligible to receive, and that's because that's how we've done it for the other two conditions. And I don't think you want to have schools coming in and out of these requirements depending on whether they actually have a student on public tuition. So if they're eligible to receive, they will be subject to these requirements. That's the change there. It's a conforming change, but I mentioned it in a bit more detail because it's something that was put into Act 173. And we're changing it just to conform to how we're doing it now with these conditions. Is that clear?
It is to me. I'm looking.
What page are we on again?
Page
We're
21.
Oh, okay. I thought you said 19. Well, think you said line 9.
I may have.
we started on 18 and it was just
It's me. It's me. Thank you.
No.
Then moving on to the contract. So we have a new section 16. I'll just read through this. It says, on or before August 1, 2022, the State Board of Education shall create and post on its website a standard form contract for use by approved independent schools eligible to receive public tuition that complies to the requirements of the new statute we put into place. The contract shall contain each of the following provisions, and this is just a repeat, really. So, well, the first one is that the State Board's authorization for the school to receive public tuition is conditioned on continued compliance by the school of this contract, as well as any other conditions required by law or State Board rules. And then 2 and 3 and 4 are just your 3 conditions that we've been talking about. So they would be in your contract, in the contract. And then on page 23, line 11 has the same thing, but this is now for a standard form contract for independent schools in another state or country. So, and this would have the 2 conditions here, not the LEP one, but the other 2 are here: anti-discrimination and no use for religious worship. And then importantly, on page 24, line 17, for both these contracts, it says the contract signed on behalf of the State Board and school under these sections shall contain no other conditions or requirements than those required under this section. The State Board and the school shall amend the contract as necessary to comply with applicable law, and the State Board shall amend its small contract accordingly. I think that should say small contracts, plural.
Okay.
And then we have a transition provision on page 25, section 17, says a student enrolled for the 21-22 school year in or has been accepted for enrollment in the 22-23 school year by an independent school in another state or country that would not be eligible to receive public tuition shall continue to be entitled to public tuition until such time as the student graduates from that school. The school shall not be required to enter into the contract with the State Board of Education. And that's it.
Okay. Any questions? I'm hoping we'll vote this out by Thursday. Still gives us a few days of work. Jim, you have one more change that you're going to bring to us. And if you could do that on Tuesday, that would be great.
Yeah, I have it already drafted up, so I'll just I'll send it to Daphne after this, and
that'd be great.
So people have time to look at it. Yep,
that'd be great. And yeah, I'm probably easier to ask who we haven't heard from on this bill. I think very few people. I think just about everybody's. I think we have covered everybody that needs to be in. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. Thanks, Jim. We all have our homework to take a look at this and see if there are any other outstanding questions. I would like it to go before town meeting week so that we, if at all possible. And I'm also hoping that we can do mascots and miscellaneous ed before town meeting week. So we can just sort of come back and do hopefully S162 and a couple of other things, a couple of surprises. Okay. Any other comments or questions? I think that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. It's a lot of work.